All right. Say it's recording. Oh, no, it's... All right, everybody, welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings. I'm here with as always, with my co-host Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how's it going?
It's going all right. Haven't watched a lot of, I guess, current wrestling this week. Just a lot of old wrestling. I think like that last night I watched like an Io Shirai like explosion death match. It was pretty basic, but like the explosion spots were pretty insane.
Look, you're talking to someone who wrote an article last year advocating for the return of the explosion death match, especially in the COVID empty arena era. You doing all these cinematic matches, forget about them. I want to see someone get blown up. It's a fantastic spectacle. I think if anyone hasn't seen them, go back and watch like some of the Atsushi Onita, like
Oh
FMW,
yeah.
like the
hmm
explosions are insane. It's not like, like a little spark goes off or something like that. It's like the entire ring explodes and like there's this mushroom cloud
hmm
of smoke uh exploding. They used to run these baseball stadium shows where it's unbelievable. People should go and watch it. But yeah, that's one of the things about
And maybe Sting will explode.
yeah, like why not? Like I'm serious. Like if Braun Strowman can be chained to a chair and threatened by a Bray Wyatt holding a snake, and we can call that a wrestling match. I don't understand why we can't just have the exploding ring. I'd be way more into that. At least there's clear drama involved. Um, all right, but yeah, what's weird is that like when you're like me and like a lot of people, and you're just like consistently overwhelmed by the amount of wrestling content that's created, and you're trying to keep up with everything. I like almost have no time to watch old stuff. And I love watching old stuff, and there's so much old stuff that I
hmm
haven't seen. Especially you and me, Jason, we're on the younger side, so we haven't seen necessarily like every episode of Nitro or
Yeah.
all of the stuff that's happened in the '90s and stuff that I think maybe older fans would have already seen before. There's so much out there to see and so available, but it's like I think one of the Voices of Wrestling guys tweeted out that like last week, it's only like January 10th and I'm already behind on wrestling in 2021, and it kind of constantly feels that way. If you want to try to keep, obviously it's hard enough just keeping up with all of WWE's contents. You throw in AEW, throw in the 10 Japanese promotions you're kind of trying to follow, any indie stuff, any European stuff, any Mexican stuff. It
hmm
becomes impossible. There's no way to watch it all. I'm always impressed um, when people can talk about like, oh yeah, I was watching this Tokyo Joshi Pro match, and I was like, yeah, I want to watch that, but it's about number 10 on my list of things to watch. Um, but anyway, uh, that aside, we're going to get back to our topic that we were originally going to discuss today, which is we're going to go over CM Punk's career, the peak of CM Punk's career, which was obviously the pipe bomb promo and the Summer of Punk, and kind of how the impact that had not only on his career but on professional wrestling in general. Of course, his eventual exit from WWE and his de facto retirement from professional wrestling, and also because it will be the rumor that never ever goes away. When will CM Punk return to pro wrestling? When will he have another match? Who will it be with? Who will it be again? Who will be working against? Uh, all of that kind of aspects of where we could see him popping up, because it does seem like I know everyone thinks this every year, but it does seem like 2021 might be the year he finally gets back in. I feel like we're leaning. I would have said like no way maybe a few years ago, but it does seem like 2021 he's coming back in. So for starters, Jason, I guess I'll ask you this first question. Let's go back to CM Punk, either his independent days or his early run in WWE. When was kind of like your first impression of CM Punk? Do you remember when you kind of saw him for the first time?
Yeah, I didn't watch his Ring of Honor or indie stuff, but I did watch his early WWE stuff, like when he was teaming with Kofi Kingston back when Kofi had a Jamaican accent, as he'll sometimes remind you.
Yeah.
But that was back when they were tag team champions, and then that was my first time watching him. And I think during that age, I liked all the punk rock music, and he really embodied that sort of punk rock lifestyle. And especially his theme music, really loved his theme music, his old one before Cult of Personality. That was a great theme song. And so, like, yeah, I just enjoyed all of that from Punk during that time. Before he made a transition to the pipe bomb and straight to society type stuff.
Yeah, I don't really know what it was about CM Punk when I first found, because I'm like you, I wasn't paying attention to independent wrestling at that time. I was like 10, so I wouldn't have been able to
Yeah,
see too much of
exactly.
it. Um, and I first like found out about him like when he was on ECW when WWE relaunched ECW,
Yep.
and he was kind of the young guy that they were kind of pushing. EC when they relaunched ECW, they had Rob Van Dam and Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman and Sabu and these
Mm-hmm.
ECW guys that everyone associates with the original incarnation of the company. But the WWE show, CM Punk was kind of, and Kofi was Kingston was there. I'm trying to think who else was on
Jack
that.
Swagger,
Yeah, he started on ECW, right? I'm trying to think of this other
Geo
guys. I know like
Jackson.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I know they brought in like later they brought in like Sheamus started on ECW, Zack Ryder started on
Yeah.
ECW, but Punk was one of the guys that they kind of brought in and was like kind of like the new guy they were gonna try to push. Then they ended up making it all about Bobby Lashley, and that was a famous like dispute between CM Punk or Paul Heyman and Vince McMahon because Heyman wanted to push CM Punk as like the new face of ECW, and McMahon wanted to
Mm-hmm.
push Bobby Lashley, which is pretty indicative of both what I think both guys' philosophy when it comes to pro
Yeah.
wrestling. But for me personally, I like didn't really like CM Punk. And again, I want to say this: I was basically a kid. I was a kid at this time. I think I was like 12. Um, there was something about like the I was kind of like the anti you Jason. There was something about the punk rock thing that I didn't like. Like I thought he was
Okay.
kind of like trying too hard, and
Mm-hmm.
I liked punk rock music and I liked heavy metal and all that stuff, and I still do. But it was just like I kind of like just saying he had all these tattoos. They're like oh he's got the Pepsi logo tattoo. It just seemed kind of dumb to me. It didn't really connect with me. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but over time he did grow on me, and as I became older and became more able to appreciate the good aspects of what made him a pro wrestler, I became a fan. And I think that's true for a lot of people when it comes to pro wrestling. When they're kids, they think that oh so and so is really good and so and so is like bad and they don't like them. And when they become more mature and have a greater understanding of
Mm-hmm.
like what is success in pro wrestling and what is good and what is bad, they kind of turn. And for people of you and I generation, it's someone like CM Punk. For people of older generations, it might be Bret Hart, it might be Shawn Michaels, it might be
Yeah,
Randy
exactly.
Savage. Um, yeah, and then so like the first thing to me that he really did that really stood out was when he started the Straight Edge Society. And he had this gimmick where he played up the fact that he was straight edge and became like this mocking like cult leader figure where he
Mm-hmm.
insulted everyone else for not being as pure as him, being tainted by substances. And he's gone on the record and said that that was the most fun he's ever had in his career, and that was like if he could just do that forever he would. What did you think about the Straight Edge Society?
Yeah, obviously with retrospect, like if like as you know you learn about his indie career, he did that on the indies as well, and so he brought that storyline into I guess looking back on the indies, he didn't do it as large as he did in WWE, which I guess is to be expected. You have a bigger budget, like
Mm-hmm.
how an indie filmmaker gets a big budget movie, things will be a lot more bigger. And yeah, like I had some friends who were straight edge, and so yeah, I guess that wasn't too jarring to me because I kind of understood what being straight edge meant at that time. But I guess during that time, that was pretty new. Like being straight edge wasn't really a mainstream sort of topic. I guess now it is
It's
in
certainly
some
new in the
respects.
it's certainly new in the wrestling industry.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then yeah, CM Punk bringing that in, and he's like the perfect guy to do that because I guess in some respects, CM Punk, the guy you see on TV is in some respects the same way he is in real life. He's a bit obnoxious. He's a bit strong-headed, and that can rub people the wrong way sometimes. And it certainly rubbed the wrong way as a heel. And then he brought in Luke Gallows, who I think now Luke Gallows is the coolest guy ever, but back then he was just Festus, and Festus was not cool. And then and he made his transformation. Also, has Serena, who's now NWA Women's Champion. It's a weird thing to look back on 10 years later. And then you have Joy Mercury in there as well. It was a very weird group at that time.
What was what was Serena Deeb's name in WWE? Was it Serena? Now I looked
Yeah,
it up.
just Arena.
Was it? I thought she had like a Carney name, like she,
I don't
you
think
might be
so. Yeah, I
right.
think she's just
She,
Serena. Unless they changed it
yeah,
after she
no,
joined the Straight Society.
you were right. She was Serena. All right. Anyway, yeah, and she looked very different than she does now. And she was super like underutilized in WWE too. Like I don't even like I
Oh
think she
yeah,
might
for
have like
sure.
she did spots, but I don't even know if she actually wrestled. But that was kind of what kind of sold me on CM Punk, which is he played it so strong. Like he had a clear message, unlike people like Bray Wyatt when they ran their cult. And I liked the Wyatt family for what it
Right.
was, but I think it ran
Hmm.
its course because he never really had like a purpose or a message. He just said things that sounded cool in the microphone, but when he did that week after week, it wasn't um, as consistently entertaining, I guess. And with Punk, he had so much material to work with because there's couldn't be a better industry to get into than the pro wrestling industry if you want your character to be preaching down at people who have known past
Yes.
substance abuse issues. And he got a lot of programs out of that. And even then, he just could ham it up so much. He had that feud with Rey Mysterio, and he sang "Happy Birthday" to Aaliyah, who's a little girl at the time. Do you remember that? And he sang like just this
Oh yeah.
creepy "Happy Birthday," and he's like, "Happy Birthday." It was so good, and and I believe he had well, that was, I guess, a little bit later. And so but that kind of fizzled out. They stopped that. And I don't think he was super happy about that. But that was when I first started noticing him like, okay, this guy is really talented. And it wasn't just that he was a good worker, because he was. It was that charisma, that confidence on the microphone. And more than anything, just an ability to connect with the current audience in a way that I don't know if there's ever been a WWE wrestler since Punk who really got that kind of connection, who really
Hmm.
was like, got fans jazzed up to be like, that's the guy I want to rally around. I don't think, even though like Drew McIntyre, Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens, Seth Rollins, those guys have been popular. Daniel Bryan, obviously. Um, but even Daniel Bryan, Bryan was over. The Yes chant was over. People liked him, some of his programs, but I still didn't really. Punk had like a different kind of cultural connection with the fans. It kind of felt like he was in the right place in the right time, the same way like Steve Austin was in the late '90s and Hulk Hogan was in the '80s.
Sure.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah, I get that. I mean, there are even like rumors that like, oh, Punk was gonna wrestle Stone Cold at that time. Whether that was true or not, like that was a dream match everyone was dying for during that time because of those comparisons, like you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and he was the anti-hero. The whole pipe bomb promo, he was kind of supposed to be the heel and ended up kind of having to be the baby face because it was just so popular. But it just felt like there was a real time and place with Punk's rise to success
Hmm.
that it felt very organic, and B, it just felt like he was the right person at the right time. And the fans could connect with him. Like, I don't know, it's just pop culture in the late 2000s, uh, early 2010s kind of fit nicely with him, and he felt relevant. His character didn't feel dated. He never said like things that made him sound stupid or dated. Like I feel that way sometimes with Drew. Like Drew just kind of says a lot of generic babyface things, and I'm sure
Sure.
Drew
Yeah.
McIntyre in real life is like a relatively cool normal human being, but when he's playing the WWE babyface guy, he feels just kind of like, okay, this is like Vince McMahon writing for a guy 40 years younger than him. And
Hmm.
Punk didn't never sounded like that. It never felt inauthentic. It never felt like he was playing a part. It felt like this guy's kind of a smarmy d-bag. He's smart. He's got a quick wit. And you might not like what he says, and you might say like, "Oh, that guy's so annoying," but you can respect his talent, and you respect that he always felt like he was real. And I think that was a key part to what made him so popular.
Well, I think also that was also like a different time in the company as well. Like, yeah, I think that was like 10 or 12 years ago, and then like even Punk kind of said like he had the ability to say to a writer, say, hey, I don't like your script. He's gonna rip a script apart and just I'm gonna say what I want to say. Most talents now, they don't really have that ability. I mean, sure, Drew has that ability, but it still feels like there's the Vince McMahon is still has that control over the talents, even though some of them have some leeway. It felt like back then that a lot more talents like CM Punk had a lot more leeway to say or do whatever they wanted because the company, it hasn't grown as big as it was now. I'm sure the company was big back then as well, but still obviously the company is growing even bigger, even after 10 years. And so, I feel like the company was a lot different as well. So maybe that's part of it as well with CM Punk feeling like, he was a lot bigger, just for the right time at least.
Well, he was more protective of his spot and he was more protective of his character. I think you could
Yeah, for
point to
sure.
certain I think you can point to certain people in WWE who, and like I don't know the backstage interactions with all these
Yeah.
people. This is just
Hmm.
us as fans looking into it and seeing what we see
Yeah,
on
exactly.
screen. There's sometimes I think that those people should, there's certain incidents where I said, someone's, whoever it was, I'll use Seth Rollins as an example and not a particular knock on Seth Rollins, but I'll use the eye for an eye match as an example. Like Seth Rollins, like is this character where he's gonna yank the eye out of Rey Mysterio, and at the end of the finish, he's gonna throw up, and it was just this
Hmm.
awful looking finish. He looked terrible for it, and to me as a fan, I guess, and I again want to say that inside the locker room, the relationship could be completely different, and I have no idea what that relationship actually is. But as a
Hmm.
fan, I see that and I say, Seth should really have the instincts to say, I shouldn't throw up after I do this. I shouldn't. This
Yeah.
angle's stupid. I don't think Punk would have ever done that. I think Punk would understand,
No, probably
Punk
not.
took his ball and went home. Punk left the company
Yep.
because he had those kind of disputes. And I'm not saying Seth Rollins should have quit the company over being asked to do that or anything like that, but it's one of those things where it just seems like you should be able to put your foot down and say no. And I don't know if in 2021 the relationship is different than it was in 2011 between talent and management and talent's ability to make changes to their content. I think Roman Reigns has expressed the ability. There was a report a few weeks ago, I think, about Reigns and Heyman nixing something in a SmackDown segment. I forget what it was. I think it had to do with like the contract signing with Adam Pearce or someone was supposed to appear and then they didn't. But it just seems like you're right. It was a different time in the company. I feel like the company now is sees their individual stars almost as more expendable than back then. They're more
Yeah, for
reliant on the
sure.
part-time talent. They're more reliant on, uh, you know, Ric Flair coming back and popping a rating, or Goldberg coming back and challenging for the WWE Championship than they were in 2011, where it seemed like, they were very reliant on Cena, very reliant on CM Punk, very reliant on Randy Orton in a way that maybe they're not today. They're seen talent, it may be seen as more expendable, and talent sees themselves as perhaps more expendable, so they're not trying to rock the boat as much. Again, I don't know, they could be trying to change, but also like Vince McMahon's
Hmm.
not as good of a booker as he was 10 years ago. That's just a
Yeah,
fact.
for sure.
You can't look at the product and either way and say that there's any difference between anything else other than that he's not as good of a booker. I mean, the storylines in 2011 are way better than they are today. The ability to get people over was much better in 2011 than they are today. The ability to string together logical storylines that went week after week after week and made sense and satisfied fans was so much better than it was 10 years ago. So there's a lot of differences, but I don't know if we could see someone get kind of just take that jump into from going from being like an upper mid card guy to being just like the biggest star in the company so organically.
Yeah, at least not anytime soon. With and also, the landscape of wrestling was different back then as well. There's no AEW, there's no like Impact or Ring of Honor. Like they were still doing well, but they weren't like threatening like any other WWE in any type of way. New Japan, like they're doing all right, but still again like they weren't threatening any other company, and so it was just WWE at the top. And so I guess maybe that's why there was more of a security there with a lot of just not only WWE, but also its stars as well. Like, if you leave WWE, you're basically nothing. Like WWE at that point was the zeitgeist of wrestling. Like if like right now, like you don't have to join WWE to be a big name in wrestling. If you can if you want. That's more of a life choice and a more of a
Hmm.
financial choice now to join WWE. Back then, it really wasn't. Like it was WWE or bust basically back then.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. When CM Punk left WWE, people were not necessarily being like, "Oh, he's gonna pop up in Ring of Honor, or he's gonna pop up in Impact." Now, if like say Seth Rollins quit WWE in a similar way to uh, how Punk quit WWE, people would immediately be like, "Oh, he's gonna show up in AEW, or he's gonna show
Yeah.
up in New Japan." And you're right, the landscape was different. WWE was more successful, like and more popular in 2011 than they are now, although the money is different because the television deals and WWE could offer more money
Mhm.
now. But you're right, it wasn't as competitive an environment, and that was the thing was that I guess like the when Punk left, most people just assumed the next time we saw him would be on WWE programming at some point. It wasn't
Yeah.
like we were thinking that he was going to jump. I mean, so I want to take you back to the pipe bomb promo. Um, one of the few moments that I remember exactly where was when I was watching a promo and how I felt immediately afterwards. Uh, so we're going to go back in the time machine back to 2011. Was it? What I just had the date on me. So June, I got that June 27th, 2011, I think was the date. So Raw goes
Yes.
off the air. Punk, cuts this promo with John Cena in the ring, and he basically says stuff that people had known, but no one had ever said on television really before. That, you know,
Hmm.
Vince McMahon sucks, like doesn't push me as a star, is obsessed with pushing The Rock and John Cena. The famous line, I like to think things are better when CM Punk's when he's dead, but it's just going to be taken over by his idiot daughter and doofus son-in-law. All this stuff that was just so unexpected at the time. And I remember, June of 2011, I would have been, I think I was somehow, even though it sounds like I should have been on summer vacation, I was still in school at the time. I think school was about to get out because I had this routine where I would watch Raw the night before, Monday night, and then Tuesday morning before I went to school, because I would have been in 11th grade at the time, uh, I would like log onto my computer and I would like make some comments about what are my thoughts on Raw. Like at 11 o'clock, I was like, I have to go to bed. I have to get up for school in the morning. I'm not going to spend time making comments online about what I thought about Raw, but I would do it in the morning. It's just kind of a routine I was in. And so, but I remember that night just like being like running upstairs to my computer as soon as Raw cut off the air because I was like, I have to post right now. I have to see what other people are posting about this. I can't believe it. It was really one of the most like invigorating times I've ever experienced as a
Hmm.
wrestling fan. I was worked like it. I was like, CM Punk shot. Oh my God, it was real. Like I couldn't like I totally thought what he said was disapproved. I thought when I cut off his mic, it was like real. I was like so worked by it. And looking back on it, it's really yeah, like my reaction is I have very fond memories of it. Did you watch it live? Do you remember like
Yeah, I just watched it live in my room, and I was like you. Like I thought he was shooting all over the company, and then of course, for those who don't know, like it was basically a work shoot, more or less. Like
mhm.
he got what he said approved, but a lot of it like was just all off the cuff, and like his mic cutting off was a work as well. Like that was all planned. But yeah, at the time we didn't know that. Like I was kind of reading dirt sheets at the time, and so I was looking up like, oh, what happened? He's gonna get fired. What's
Yeah.
gonna happen next? Because that was the whole story storyline as well. Like his contract was legitimately expiring during that time.
Yeah, and to your point about what you said, like he borrowed the straight edge society character from his previous, his indie days. He worked a
Mhm.
similar gimmick. He did this almost exact same storyline in Ring of Honor when he was about to go to WWE, where he was the Ring of Honor champion, and he's like,
Yeah.
"I'm my contract's going to run out. I'm going to take the title with me," and that it's a repeat of that storyline, but it was just so, like I said, invigorating as a fan. And looking back on it, it's kind of hard to like really understand how big it was now because one of the side effects of the pipe bomb promo was it just started this trend of getting all these like similar pipe bomb promos that we would get over the years and
Sure. Mhm.
WWE had ended up morphing into this company where if you really want to get over as a babyface, you just get the microphone and you'd say like, "Oh, I'm not being booked," and you'd shoot a little bit,
Mhm.
um, and like people would get that reaction, and it was kind of like people mimicking what made the original pipe bomb promo so successful. But over the years, I felt like it waned. There's the Kevin Owens promo from I think last year or 2 years ago where he talked about hey, you said changes will be different, and all we've gotten is Shane McMahon, and it's just
Right.
all these different kind of incarnations of the talent is obsessed with the company.
Oh, even like ironically, AJ Lee, she did her own Pipe Brown promo on the Divas division back when like Total Divas was starting up, and like there's a whole divide of like real wrestlers, quote unquote, and the total divas wrestlers. And like it's just ironic that she had her own pipe bomb promo as
And,
well.
and that was well received at the time. But what ended up happening was this trend that still exists to this day, where WWE really leaned into that aspect and they brought the Authority on as the heel, you know,
Yep.
the heel executives who were making the decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
it ended up becoming a company that to this day, this is still the extent where all of the heat that WWE gets is now basically put onto the bookers and Vince McMahon
Mm-hmm.
and WWE administrators. Like, for instance, let's say this Kevin Owens Roman Reigns match at Royal Rumble. Let's say that match has just a crappy finish. Jey Uso runs out, screws over Kevin Owens, and that's the finish. In traditional wrestling logic, the heat would be on Roman Reigns and Jey Uso. Everyone would be mad that they cheated to win the match. But in 2021, that's not the case. The heat would go on to people online being like, Vince is an idiot. This is a stupid finish. Why would they book that? There'd be no heat on the heel wrestlers. All of the heat would be on the decision makers because over the years, WWE has opened itself to that kind of criticism by putting the decision makers front and center and encouraging fans to direct their hatred at them. Obviously, from when the Authority, it was all done in storyline purposes, but the sentiment was real, which is that when people are upset, they're upset that Daniel Bryan wasn't getting pushed. They got upset at Vince and they got upset at Triple H and Stephanie and the WWE writers and the people who were making those decisions. And now it seems like pretty much all of the heat that the company ever gets is put not on the wrestlers and not on the bad guys, but just on management. And the best stories we have, such as Daniel Bryan winning the title at WrestleMania 30, are because Daniel Bryan overcame management, not because he beat Batista, right, or Randy Orton. It was
Mm-hmm.
because he, did something that WWE management really didn't want to do. And it all
Yeah,
started
for
with the
sure.
pipe bomb promo. And I think that's like the
Well, yeah.
biggest uh, effect of
Well,
that.
yeah. I was just gonna say, like, you could even like go back into like the Attitude Era, like Stone Cold against Vince McMahon. Like, I feel like WWE, they've been desperately, like, for like 2 decades now, have been trying to recapture that magic of that feud. Like, I would think people would consider that the greatest feud of all time. Vince McMahon against Mr. Stone Cold against Mr. McMahon, like the whole back and forth, and of course he had Stone Cold going anti-authority on Vince McMahon, and ever since then they've been trying to capture that magic to varying degrees, mostly failures. I would argue like they have not been able to capture that magic. But then obviously the Daniel Bryan story was very successful. But again, like you said, it opened them up to future critiques of themselves. Like, yeah, Triple H, I think some reports say he really did think that Daniel Bryan was a B+ player. Like, he didn't think much of Daniel Bryan, but they only booked him because the fans wanted him to be a big star.
Oh, well, that's definitely true. I mean, look at how they've managed Bryan's entire career.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
he comes back when he came back and he basically is he's been basically a mid card guy for his entire career in WWE outside of that, title run and then the little heel run he had as the Planet's champion. But the way they book Bryan is the way they see him. And I think, look, he could win the Royal Rumble and face Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. That would be the most interesting match they could probably do. But just looking at historically how WWE has treated Daniel Bryan, I don't think they see, like, Vince does not see Daniel Bryan as Roman Reigns as the biggest match at WrestleMania. He'd rather have Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns or Goldberg and Roman
Yeah,
Reigns.
for sure.
That's just all the evidence we have of how WWE handles Daniel Bryan and what Vince sees in stars and what he thinks are the biggest matches for WrestleMania suggests that that's the case. To bring it back to Punk a little bit, and so he cuts that promo and it became like the talk of the wrestling world, and it obviously helped his career a lot. And I went to, I want to say it was the go home show for Money in the Bank. The last Raw before the Money in the Bank show was in Boston. Did you go to the show?
Yep.
So
I
you
did
were
go to the show, but I watched on TV.
okay. So I happened to be at the show live, and I believe he had it might have not been the go home show. It might have been the previous show, but he was doing a contract signing. Vince comes out. It's when he said he wanted the
Yep.
bring back the WWE ice cream bars. Why aren't I in the ice cream bar? It was that promo, and man, he was just so like electric, like just like his connection with the audience. And this is only a few weeks after he um had cut the pipe bomb promo. And up until the pipe bomb promo, it really wasn't like CM Punk was red hot. They had kind of put him in as the new leader of the Nexus
Yep.
once they kind of ditched Wade Barrett and made CM Punk, which was a weird fit. It didn't really work. It wasn't like CM Punk was like red hot and then he cut this pipe bomb promo and he went up even hotter. It was more like he was just an upper mid card guy that could main event a little bit. Um, and then he cut this promo, and it was just the dynamic was so different, and he was so popular. And again, this is in Boston, which they always say is John Cena's hometown, but I can tell you that John Cena gets booed in Boston just as much as he gets booed everywhere else. And the fans loved Punk, and they had such a great connection with him. And he, he cut the promo where he said, "If maybe I'll go to Ring of Honor, maybe because when I win the title, I am never coming back." And it was just so strong. And like the Vince McMahon, the Mr. McMahon Stone Cold feud, that was done almost all in kayfabe. Yeah, the fans knew that Vince McMahon was the real owner of the company, but all of the heat in the feuds, there was no worked shoot promos. Everything was done like Vince is the decision, the general manager rather than the matchmaker on Raw. He's the one that hates Stone Cold, and everything was done within the realm of the wrestling show. In with the difference between that and like Daniel Bryan and the Authority, and then just what we have now, which is even without the Vince McMahon Authority figures, they are still the de facto biggest heels in the company. Is just that fans are just now aware of like the real decision making, and they don't really care about the results of the match. They don't care about how the heel won. They don't care about how the babyface got screwed. They just know that they're not satisfied with the results, and the heat goes on to people who they can't boo and people who they can't really beat. Like the babyface really can't get that big win over Vince because it's always his company. Even Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30. He's still chasing that moment. He's still he's looking to get that big win again. I don't know. It's just so different since 2011. But that kind of that energy for Punk, and he became like a legit mainstream celebrity because of that. Something that he was showing up on. Yeah, I remember he showed up on podcasts and he said like like usually the only time people talk about pro wrestling on mainstream news at the time was if somebody died or there was some form of scandal, and this was a time where a guy did something great in pro wrestling and people were talking about it that normally wouldn't talk about pro wrestling.
Yeah, because at that point, WWE, they weren't, like I said, Total Divas was just starting, and so they haven't entered the mainstream of like entertainment just yet. They're still on the fringes of it, like you said, like Punk said, like there's just a couple of years, after the Eddie Benoit tragedies, and then like that's when pro wrestling unfortunately became mainstream because of those. And then you obviously, like with Punk, like you said before, he became like part of the zeitgeist for whatever reason or for another, whether it was like his punk rock style or whether he was like his anti-authority type figure for like a new audience at least. But then yeah, like that promo against Vince McMahon, like he had his feet on the table. He was like openly casual with him, and then at that time, that was unheard of. Like you couldn't imagine any other talent doing that in front of Vince McMahon, but Punk did that, and of course, yeah, he's wearing like his new Nexus shirt, which is like, which today's standards, like you just like, oh yeah, like he's part of the Nexus, like that made no sense. But then, like, yeah, at that time, that was a whole part of John Cena's story with the Nexus, where like he was, feuding against the Nexus, and then so it made sense for Punk to, as the new leader of the Nexus, that's probably what they were trying to do there. But obviously, it turned into something else later on. But then, yeah, but for Punk, it did seem like he was going to leave, at least in my mind, back then. I thought he was going to leave. He was talking about these other promotions that I'm sure for a WWE audience, they're hearing about for the first time. They're hearing about Ring of Honor for the first time, New Japan for the first time. You can look it up on YouTube. Then just say like, oh, like all these other crazy things that are going on in wrestling. And so, in a weird way, Punk was sort of bringing eyes to other things in wrestling. I don't know, like officially that was the case, but it just seemed to be that way during that time.
Yeah, and so it leads up to the Money in the Bank in Chicago, which has to be I'm trying to think if there's another equivalent of this. It has to be probably pretty close to the most famous non-WrestleMania wrestling events in like the history of like modern American wrestling. I guess like if you want to go back and say like Starcade '98 and like some WCW events, but I guess from like 2000 on and maybe like All Out now you could talk about that, um, but right like I feel like even if you're just talking about WWE, like it almost feels like that event which you're using as your background right now uh, is the most like and really just that match to an extent it feels like the most important match um and that WWE probably had almost across the entire decade. It's definitely the best match.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would definitely agree with that. I mean, at least during that time, yeah, you guys could use All In as a future example, but like before then yeah, because like Impact, I'm sure they had some big shows, and Roy Vonner, they had some big shows here in North America, but they weren't as big, obviously, as WWE. Like I said before, WWE, they were the zeitgeist, they were pro wrestling, and so or the thing WWE did that was pro wrestling, and then Money in the Bank, it was just a perfect storm. Like it was in Chicago, CM Punk's hometown. He got a hero's welcome, and just like WWE, they still have the whole entrance on their YouTube channel, and I watch that from time to time, and it's just crazy the pop he gets when Cult of Personality hits, and then he just gets a big hero's welcome into this new building. It was called Personality, but that was after. But still, like he got a big hero's welcome, and it was just a crazy pop during that match. The crowd, just their whole entire match, they were into it every single second, and it's rare to see that, especially nowadays.
Well, it's what people like. The reason people like watching the Attitude Era and like the Attitude Era is like the Stone Cold comes out and the place goes just absolutely crazy, and there's so much
Mm-hmm.
energy, and it's all the stuff that people really liked about that time period. And that's what they were able to capture that. They have been chasing it for decades since the Attitude Era. And on
Yep.
that night, they were able to really capture that, which is just this huge pop. The crowd loved the babyface so much. And he's not even he's the heel. He's not even the babyface. Cena is the babyface.
Mm-hmm.
But the crowd loved him so much. They really wanted him to win. And you know what? That used to be the norm in pro wrestling. I think now fan bases are more scattered and
Yeah, sure.
they're not. It's not all like they all hope to win. Like if you go watch any '80s, show, everyone wants Hulk Hogan to win. The pop is huge when he wins. It's huge. The he.
Mm-hmm.
It's a simpler time back then, but that's what they were able to capture was just kind of that energy and that momentum and the right time and the right place. And Punk had a knack for just marketing his anti-authority appeal. Remember when he won the title and he tweeted out the picture of the WWE title in his refrigerator, and it was just like
Yeah.
it's like he just had these little like those little touches that are like, man, this guy's so cool, he's so legit. And again, that connection with the audience where people were like, I love wrestling, and this is the guy that represents what good wrestling is to me. And I don't know if people feel that way about like Roman Reigns or Drew McIntyre. I think like maybe like Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks with their fan base, which is substantially smaller than the CM Punk's fan base. I'm not saying they're at the same level of popularity, but it's similar kind of energy where like these are guys who connect with me, and I want them to represent my love of professional wrestling. And I don't know if like there's really anyone in WWE since then that has been able to connect with the fan base in a similar way.
I mean, I guess Daniel Bryan is the only closest one, but that's really it.
Yeah, yeah, and Daniel Bryan you could argue was actually more over than CM Punk at the time, but I still felt like
Mm-hmm.
Brian obviously had a big part of Brian thing was the yes chant, and people really liked Daniel Bryan's yes chant. And I'm not one of those guys who's only over because he's not over, his chant is over or anything like that, but it in some ways it helped make the feeling and energy feel more manufactured, like, oh, we're all beating up for him to go yes, yes, yes. And I that's professional wrestling, right? It was all leading up to Stone Cold giving someone the
Yeah,
bird and drinking a
exactly.
beer. It was all leading up to The Rock, doing the people's elbow and that kind of stuff. But I don't know, there's something about the connection that I felt. I don't know, maybe it's because his character was so like pop culture savvy with the tattoos and the cool shirt designs and you know the kind of like smart aleck attitude. Daniel Bryan was more just like a classic white meat baby face, and it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
harder for that person, I think, to connect with like the from a human standpoint. It's harder for them to connect with the audience because he just felt like a
Yeah,
baby
for sure.
face in the same way. It feels like I'm knocking Daniel Bryan, but I'm really not. It's more just I found Punk's appeal kind of pretty unique when it comes to professional wrestling, and I don't know if that's going to be the case. Let me hold on a second. I want to look up the Money in the Bank card because I'm trying to think of anything else that happened on that show. Um, this will be
Well, I
a
think just
fun
to
thing.
add on,
Yeah, keep talking. I got
yeah,
the
just to
card
add
coming
on,
up.
I think, well, I think during that time, like, I think there's always anti-WWE segments, just throughout WWE's history. But I think that time is when it started, when people were very
Yes.
anti-WWE for various reasons, whether you didn't like Vince McMahon, you didn't like WWE's business practices, whatever reason. I think that's when it really started. And CM Punk, he embodied that. I think people like the idea of, hey, CM Punk's gonna leave WWE. He's gonna, stick it to them. He's gonna take that WWE championship. He's going to defend it in New Japan or Ring of Honor, wherever, PWG. And then, I think that's what really was the difference. Because Daniel Bryan, he seemed like a guy, like, he still wanted to be in WWE. There was no sentiment of, like, oh, I hate WWE. I'm going to leave it here. It's just like, oh, I want to succeed in WWE. I think that's the big difference there with Punk and Bryan in terms of their runs, if you want, like, sort of nitpick between both of them. Since, yeah, like, they're both really good.
Yeah, and I agree that that kind of did start the trend, and that kind of gets back into me saying like the authority figures are the biggest heels in the company. I think starts with Punk because Punk kind of introduces the concept to fans. I think fans had been frustrated with WWE decisions in the past, but it wasn't as widely talked about. It wasn't like a central talking point of WWE. But he
Mhm.
brings it up in the pipe bomb promo, and people are like, you know what? Yeah, like I don't really like the job that Vince McMahon is doing. And then I think the Royal Rumble 2014, which was, I hope I have these years right. Royal Rumble 2014, which is the year where Bryan doesn't come out and Batista wins. And then the Royal Rumble 2015, which is when Roman Reigns wins and The Rock comes out and the fans boo. And that kind of seemed like that cemented the idea that now fans, the main enemy of the fans is Vince McMahon and the decision makers in WWE. It's not any heel wrestler. It's and now fan. And that kind of created this along with leaning into it by having the authority as main heels on the television programming, but created this atmosphere where the fans could openly be hostile to WWE management, and that became almost the sole focus of a lot of WWE fans, which was looking at management, getting frustrated, and eventually stopping to watch the project. Um, I got the card here.
Mhm.
This will be fun. I'm just going to run through the Money in the Bank 2011 card.
Okay.
So we got the dark match here. We got Santino Marella and Vladimir Kozlov. They were the comedy tag team. They defeated the new Nexus, which
Yep.
of that team was David Otunga and Michael McGillicuddy. So nobody that's still in the company was in that match. I like the Santino Kozlov tag team. I remember that. I have nothing else to say about the new Nexus.
Yeah, they were legitimately funny.
Yeah, they were legit. They did. I mean, Santino was funny. He was a funny character, and it's really weird career where he starts off as like almost like in developmental as like this shooter guy, and then he becomes like this
Yes.
comedic wrestler who was a job guy but also taken kind of seriously. Um, all right, I've got all right. First match was the Money in the Bank match, which is Daniel Bryan, and he defeated Cody Rhodes, Heath Slater, Justin Gabriel, Kane, Sin Cara, Sheamus, and Wade Barrett. Again, it's real big turnover. Let me think who's in the. So Daniel Bryan's still in the company. Sheamus is still in the company. Everyone else is gone. I guess Kane might. I don't know if he has a contract with the company, but he's not like a wrestler in the company really.
He's
Um,
still friendly with the company
yeah,
though.
but all these other guys are gone. Uh, Divas Championship. Kelly defeated Brie Bella. I
Wow.
have absolutely no recollection of that because Brian wins the heavy Money in the Bank and then he ends up cashing in. I believe he cashed in on Mark Henry. And then it was like they did the program
Yes.
with Mark Henry.
Either him or Big Show.
Yeah. I think it was Big Show, and then like they ended up doing that program, and then Henry ended up no, wait a minute, because Brian holds the title until WrestleMania that year, and Sheamus wins in the famous like 15-second or 18-second opening match where he just broke kicks him. We got Mark Henry defeated Big Show. Speaking of that feud, that was also on the show. Alberto Del Rio. Oh, this is the Raw Money in the Bank ladder match. Alberto Del Rio defeated Alex Riley, Evan Bourne,
Oh God.
Jack Swagger, Kofi Kingston, The Miz, R-Truth, and Rey Mysterio. And that would lead to Alberto Del Rio cashing in on CM Punk at SummerSlam when Kevin Nash gets involved.
Yep.
And then we had Christian defeated Randy Orton via disqualification.
Oh yeah, I
And then
think that was like I think Randy Orton like kicked him in the balls or something.
Yes, it was a shit.
the whole like back and forth
It
there.
was a shitty finish. So the storyline was, so if people remember, Edge had Edge defeats Alberto Del Rio at WrestleMania that year, and Edge
Yeah.
announces his retirements.
Hmm.
So Christian, who's Edge's best friend in real life, ends up winning the World Heavyweight Championship. And it was a great, as a longtime fan of Christian, it was great. It was a real feel good moment when he won the
Oh yeah.
title.
Yep.
He immediately, like, he wins the title on Sunday, and I believe on Tuesday on SmackDown
Yeah.
he drops the title to Randy Orton, and then turns heel in the
Yep.
process, just kills him. And then so they have this feud where, even though everyone loved and supported Christian, he's now a heel, and because Randy Orton's the baby face, you could. And I'm getting mad thinking, remembering this. And then so in this, it leads up to this.
Brodus Clay was his manager.
Yeah. Oh god. And they ended up. So then Christian, in this match, the rule was that if Orton was disqualified, Orton would lose the title. So Christian I think he spits on Orton, so Orton kicks him the balls and gets disqualified. So Christian wins the title, which again completely devalues the World Heavyweight Championship because it changes hands in such a stupid way. And then I think they had a blow-off match, like a cage match on SmackDown. It might have been at a future pay-per-view, but that was the semi-main. And then the main event, of course, is CM Punk defeated John Cena. So that was fun, but I want to talk a little bit here. So CM Punk wins the title, and he's got incredible. He's so hot. He incredible moments. And then a lot of things in WWE when something really cool happens, it quickly fizzles out due to bad booking. We saw this with Daniel Bryan when he won the title at WrestleMania. We saw this, I think, with Kofi Kingston when he won the title at WrestleMania. The guy gets hot, and then just poor decisions happen. So Punk holds the title up until SummerSlam, right? And he ends up, who does he beat at SummerSlam?
John Cena.
Yeah, he beats Cena. He retains the title against Cena at SummerSlam. Well, they do this whole angle.
It was a double championship thing.
Yeah, they do this whole angle where Punk leaves. Cena, actually, first Rey Mysterio wins the WWE Championship and then loses it to Cena the same night on Raw. And so they have the two dueling championships. So Punk wins the title, and he kind of unifies the two, becomes the definitive WWE champion. And what immediately happens when he wins that title, and I mean immediate, Kevin fucking Nash comes out. It just like the most random person in the world, literally, comes out, hits a jackknife powerbomb. Alberto Del Rio, and I hated Alberto Del Rio. I just thought he was so overpushed and not interesting. But he comes out and he has the briefcase. He has the Money in the Bank briefcase, the aforementioned Money in the Bank briefcase, and he wins the title. But you know what? That's not it. The most annoying part is they played up this storyline where Kevin Nash got a mysterious text message from somebody that said, "Hey, big man, lay that guy out." And so I guess Nash, taking these orders, just walked into the ring, and I don't know why Nash was backstage. He just happened to be backstage at Money in the Bank, and he beats up Punk and then costs Punk the title. And then they kept this storyline where it was who sent this text message to Kevin Nash? And then it ended up they just said that Kevin Nash sent the text message to himself, and that it was just entirely his own self-motivation because he hated CM Punk. Even though the storyline should have just been that Alberto Del Rio, whose gimmick was that he was really rich, just paid Kevin Nash $1 million to do it. They couldn't, just because that would have made total logical sense, and they couldn't do that. And I forgot about all this stuff, and now I'm remembering it. I'm just looking at the card a little bit. So Kevin Nash and Punk end up in this feud, and it's what is CM Punk feuding with Kevin Nash over? And Punk just eviscerates Nash. He comes out and he says Kevin Nash, he was a member of the Click. You know why they call it the Click? Because every time he's on TV, everyone gets a TV remote and goes click, click, click. And it's when he walks, his knees go click, click, click. And it was all this stuff. And he ends up having a match with Nash. Right? Well, he ends up, because he's feuding with Kevin Nash, of course, he's feuding with Triple H.
Triple H.
And then Triple H, who's essentially retired at the time, comes out of retirement to wrestle CM Punk at Night of Champions in September of that year. And that's a really big
Yeah.
match. Triple H is coming out to face CM Punk. Jason, can you tell me who won that match at Night of Champions?
Of course, it's the brightest new star, CM Punk, is it not?
No, it is
Am I
Triple
wrong?
H. And
What?
he,
The ones retired Triple H?
yes, and that was a big sticking point with CM Punk, and he mentions that in the famous Colt Cabana, the famous lawsuit riddled
Yeah.
uh, Colt Cabana podcast that he did later after he quits the company, which he says he loses. Triple H comes out of retirement, beats CM Punk, and just this is like when people talk. I don't know about Triple H's reputation, like if it's as warranted as people make it to seem. But this is a classic like example of Triple H. Like he finds out someone's really over, he gets them in a program, puts them in a match, then basically books himself to go over because he's got so much creative power at that point, and then he just goes like essentially back into retirement. But not only that, that leads to our Triple H Kevin Nash feud, which nobody wanted to see in 2011. And so he has this feud with Kevin Nash, and it ends up with like this match at TLC where like the sledgehammer is like hanging like it's the Money in the Bank briefcase, and they have to
Yeah.
climb a ladder. It's like no one wants to watch Kevin Nash and Triple H climb a ladder to fight over a rubber sledgehammer, and it just we look back at like Raw ratings during like the CM Punk run, and you might look at them and say, oh, like, ratings didn't really go up. The CM Punk run is overrated. It's not like it saved the company and not like it turned ratings around or anything like that. And you have the case just looking at the numbers and saying that, but you have to look at the context of just that. After he wins the title, it's just botchamania on all of those storylines. And I don't think a lot of people remember that. I kind of forgot about it until I started doing some research for the show.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, like CM Punk, he in storyline, he says I'm gonna leave the company, and yet he's gone for like a week, basically, like 10 days. He's gone, and also he comes back right away after Cena wins the title. It's like like when John Cena, anytime John Cena gets fired. WWE can't help themselves. They can't keep him off TV for like a month. They have to keep trying to bring him back on TV right away.
Anytime anyone gets fired, it's like that.
Yeah, exactly. And even then, like after Alberto Del Rio won the title, who wins the title back? John Cena, because of course John Cena has to be the top guy in WWE at all times, because that's Vince McMahon's logic right there. And then CM Punk, yeah, like you said, he's busy feuding with Kevin Nash for whatever reason. Don't get me wrong, I love Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash is seems like the coolest guy ever, but I don't want to see him on TV, and not even 2011. I didn't want to see him on my TV. I just want to see him on Twitter, making jokes and all that stuff.
Well,
that's all I want to see with Kevin Nash.
We're talking about like trying to get that magic of the Attitude Era, right? And they were able to do that with CM Punk and Money in the Bank. And like the goal, what they ended up doing was like, instead of being like, yes, we got this guy so over, this is going to be great, they like basically immediately try to take whatever energy he got and give it on to other people who don't need it, like Triple H. And it's just one of those things that when you think about it, it's like, if you ever want to, if someone ever argues like, oh, Triple H, was very unselfish and just, put people over, which he did at a lot of portions of his career. He made Dave Bautista's career. He, put Cena over a million times, put Randy Orton over. He did do a lot of, eventually put Randy Orton over, I should say. But there's, it's those kind of stuff that I think people are always going to remember about him and his career. We're going to fast forward through a lot. Like, I don't want to go over like the rest of his career, basically. But he ends up leaving the company after the Royal Rumble spot. And that's the last, he walks out of the company. He has his contract and stuff, and there's a few month period where he was he was still employed, and I think they were going back and forth, and eventually they ended up on the day he gets on his wedding day, they famously tell him he's fired. Which when it came out, everyone was like, whatever, like of course CM Punk got fired, like this has been a dangerous game of chicken. So then I think it was later that year, he goes on the podcast with his former friend and friend at the time, Colt Cabana, and basically talks about why he quit the company. And there were, I think people boil it down to a few, like, or one thing. It's like, he just hated the creative or something like that. But if you listen to the podcast, which at the time was like unbelievable, I remember listening to it because it was free and it was just on YouTube. And I remember I think it's in two parts. And I remember just being like, oh my God, this is incredible. I was sitting in my college dorm room at the time, just like it was so revelatory. Again, this was before every WWE wrestler goes on Talk as Jericho after they get released and starts talking about their time in
Yeah.
WWE. But this was, one of the few times where I think like Moxley did a kind of a similar performance when he went on Talk as Jericho and did his podcast. But this was the first time I think a major star really left WWE and really talked about what it was like working for that company and kind of the frustrations that he felt. And yes, he was unhappy with creative. He was mad he never got the spot at WrestleMania that he felt like he deserved. He was mad that like he had to do a job to Triple H and he had to do a job to The Undertaker, and he's jobbing out to all these established guys. And it's, he's like, I'm the young guy who's over and I'm being used to keep these old guys being propped up, which he's 100% correct in saying. Mm-hmm. But also there was the thing about how the company, he didn't feel like the doctors handled his staph infection, the famous Z-Pack story. You remember this, the Z-Pack story they told?
Yeah, that forced him to, pretty much take a dump on in the ring, more or less.
Yes, the Z-Pack. I think there was one time right after CM Punk left where like a wrestler got hurt or he got hurt in storyline and the doctors run out and the crowd just starts chanting Z-Pack, Z-Pack, Z-Pack. Yeah. And yeah, and he thought he should have been paid more, which most wrestlers probably should be paid more, given the amount of revenue that WWE creates. He felt like he wasn't making his amount of money he wanted out of merchandise, and he was also just sick of the travel. So that a bunch of things led to him leaving the company. But after he leaves the company, it kind of creates this dynamic where people are just, and to this day, and we're gonna talk about it. Don't worry, guys. People talk about when will he return to wrestling? When is he gonna come back? When is he gonna come out? Is he gonna come out the Royal Rumble one year? Is he gonna, come out in AEW now, or is he going to show up? Like, what is going to happen? It's been endless speculation. What did you make of like the kind of culture we've had since CM Punk left, and just like the endless speculation about him returning?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a period of time where, like, I guess we don't know since the pandemic, but obviously the crowd kept chanting CM Punk like constantly, even in unrelated segments, and, like for very various reasons. And then I think that just stems from just the whole general discussion kind of stems from the fact that his run didn't end the way we would have liked it to. I think there's this idea of a finality with certain wrestlers. Obviously Undertaker in the last ride, he's talked about that, how you want that one perfect match, one perfect moment to end your career on. I think even Sting right now, like he's in AEW, and I think he's searching for that as well. He doesn't want his career to end the way it did, just basically almost having his career ended more or less. And I think that's what people want for CM Punk. Like he just left the company and he didn't have one final WrestleMania match or one final just any match in general. And I think that's what people are searching for. And I don't know if he wants that himself. It doesn't really sound like it, but like that's what he's saying in public, at least. I don't know what he thinks privately, but at least, in public, that's what people want. It's just one match to make it seem like his career's ended.
Yeah, so as wrestling fans, you're conditioned to basically get squeeze every drop of life out of these talents. And talent, even the biggest names, just keep working and working forever, having match after match after match until they basically cannot get medically cleared to wrestle. Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Triple H, The Undertaker, all these guys they wrestle forever, and we all get like the sentimental send off every time they wrestle because it might be the last time you see them. And we're very used to getting just the absolute physical maximum that these guys can give. And Punk is a guy who was really popular, who walked away with a lot of stuff still on the table. And it wasn't because he was injured, though I know his body was beaten up, and I'm sure that was a factor in him wanting to walk away, and probably a factor in him not wanting to get back on the ring yet. But he left stuff on the table. He wasn't like a guy who gave like who stuck around forever. And I think for wrestling fans, it's inappropriate to expect that kind of just insane physical dedication from these guys. And that if CM Punk is healthy and lives a long and healthy life, he's already given fans enough. He doesn't owe us anything. He doesn't owe us another match. He doesn't owe us. People still want Stone Cold to come back and wrestle. And it's like, dude, this guy's got
Yeah.
a bad neck and bad knees, and he hasn't wrestled in 17 years. And I know everyone loves Stone Cold, and everyone would love to see him, in a match again and work a program again, but it's just not going to happen. And people need to move on and accept that. And Punk is a particularly difficult one to do because he's unlike Austin, he's not too banged up to wrestle, and unlike he's not super old. He could come back and wrestle at a high level and perform at a high level. And I think people are just used to getting that out of wrestlers. And CM Punk is this walking example of someone who said, I don't care if I can still wrestle. I'm done.
Mm-hmm. And also, he's, um, he's had varying success post WWE. Obviously, yeah, people mock his UFC career, but still, like, whatever. Like, he that was a dream of his. I think he's even admitted like he's made some mistakes with his UFC career where he should have, built his way up. But even then, he's doing stuff with movies, with like his whole, like, doing horror projects, and he seems pretty fulfilled in life in general. And then, again, I don't know what he's thinking privately, whether he's itching to come back to the ring, but at least publicly, he hasn't really said anything of that. And, like, again, financially, he seems pretty stable financially. Like AJ, his wife, she's doing her own projects, and she's been doing well, helping them out financially as well. And so it doesn't really seem like he's desperate to come back in any sort of sense, at least publicly speaking.
Yeah, I mean, and people make fun of his UFC fights all they want, and it's like, okay, he didn't do well in those fights at all, but he wanted to have a fight. He wanted to be a UFC fighter, and he did it. Why not? And he
Yeah.
wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
and he got paid to do it. I always remember like Shaquille O'Neal. Are you familiar with the Shaquille O'Neal movie Kazam?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So like
Bad movie.
Kazam is this famously bad movie where Shaquille O'Neal played a genie, and people said like people ask him like Shaq, like, why did you do Kazam? That was like so stupid. Like, it's a terrible movie. And he just said, look, I grew up as a poor kid in Newark, New Jersey, and I always dreamt of being in a movie. And someone said, we'll give you $7 million to be in a movie. And he was in a movie. And like, that's a perfect response to that. Cause who are you to tell them that they can't,
Yeah,
they had a
exactly.
dream and they did it. And maybe they didn't do it as well as they like to do it, but they got paid a lot of money to do their dream. And I think almost everyone would accept that. And yeah, I mean, he's popped up over the years. He did the WWE on Fox show as a kind of like a special guest that they would occasionally have on, and he'd kind of just like dump on WWE's product a lot. And I haven't really like enjoyed like his like insight and performances since he left WWE. I just think it's kind of like, I think even today or yesterday there was a story about someone being asking him like who his favorite wrestler was now, and he's like, yeah, I don't really watch the product. Like it seems like he doesn't really want to be a part of wrestling, and I can't
Mm-hmm.
make him. He's not obligated to be a part of it. Um, you know, it seems like in the last year or so he's put some rumblings out that like he's I think he even said like I'm never retired. I'm available for the right opportunity or something like that. And I think that when AEW first started, and Tony Khan is kind of on the record said that one of his goals when he wanted to start was that CM Punk would be one of his biggest stars, and they haven't been able to get Punk. And they were, there's a lot of rumor about him being at All Out. I believe he was at the Starcast at All Out, right? The first one.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was.
people expected him to be on the show, perhaps, and he wasn't. And I don't think might not have. I think they've talked about like, I think he like said like something like kind of like insulting about like an offer Cody Rhodes or approach Cody Rhodes made about him. And with regards to AEW, I think one of the things that maybe people now take for granted, but when AEW is first starting and you're CM Punk and you've had a very cynical experience in the professional wrestling world, people get inquiries a lot about, oh, so and so, I've got a lot of financial backing and I'm starting a wrestling promotion. I think I should hire you.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff happens a lot in pro wrestling. I just read the Young Bucks book, and they talk about when they were first approached by Tony Khan, and they thought it was a joke, and they didn't believe that, like, because they said it happens a lot. Some guy says he's rich or has money and will, I want to have you into my wrestling promotion, and they all say like, yeah, that's nice, and like don't take it seriously. And so the original approach of AEW, CM Punk could have just saw that and been like, okay, yeah, you guys are going to start a wrestling promotion. You guys are going to go head to head with, you guys are going to battle WWE. Like all these wrestlers are going to run it. Like, yeah, I'm not buying that. Now, obviously, we all know that AEW is very stable and a very legitimate wrestling organization that people can go there and get paid a lot of money. And maybe that creates, an opportunity for him to come back. Because I do think that there is an interest in seeing him come back, no doubt. But I do think we're hitting a point where he's been gone for so long that I don't think his impact would be quite as much as it could have been maybe a few years earlier.
Um, I would disagree with that. I think it would depend on the right crowd when he comes
Mm-hmm.
back in. Like if he could get the right pop for that. But I think my big thing with CM Punk is like if he comes back, let's say he comes back to AEW, what does he do exactly? Because you look at how AEW is booked, some of the like ex WWE talent, we'll just call him that, like Miro. He's basically a mid card guy. Sting, he's like he's in a big program, but still he's probably just do cinematic matches. He's not going to be involved in anything big. And so if you're CM, like the CM Punk come in and just challenge Kenny Omega for the title, like I get he's big name for that, but like who is that servicing? And like is he challenging Darby for his TNT title? Like I don't know if people would like that because he's being a hypocrite in that sort of sense. Be like a big old name taking the spot of a younger guy in Darby Allin, who obviously AEW sees a lot of potential in, which is why they're pairing him up with Sting because they want him to get the rub off of a established name like him. And so like I'm just curious to see what he would do exactly in AEW. Right now, like would a feud against Eddie Kingston like that would be fun, but like is that really fulfilling for Galaxy and Punk?
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point about we often see this in when WWE brings back their kind of part-time guys and they bring back Goldberg or Brock Lesnar or Triple H or these guys. It's often for them to have, or The Undertaker, it's often for them to have like just kind of build up to one match. And that's kind of it. Like
Mhm.
Undertaker comes back, it's like a few weeks of a program with AJ Styles, and then we have a match, and it's just kind of an excuse to get them on the card. I think like if Punk is gonna come back and maybe he wants to work more than one match, maybe he only wants to work one match. I mean, we don't even know if he wants to come back, but presumably he signs with
Right.
AEW. Just as a hypothetical, I would think you'd want to find like a really like long storyline to put him in, and that might involve feuding with multiple people. He might feud with someone, and then he might feud with Kenny Omega. Look, if CM Punk came out and challenged Kenny Omega. If AEW had an agreement where they were in contact with Punk and we'll pay you X amount of dollars, I'm sure it would be a lot, and say, look, you're going to come out on Dynamite one week at the end of Dynamite, and you're going to, just beat up Kenny Omega. And then we'll do a 6 or 8 week program where you challenge Kenny Omega for the title at a pay per view, and maybe that's it. Look, if you can get that agreement, you do that because that would be huge. It would be, and
Yeah.
maybe not as big as it would have been. I think maybe 2018, where people were like, I think sometimes, I know me myself as a fan, I've kind of like mentally moved on from the idea that CM Punk's going to come back to wrestling.
Yeah.
So it
Agreed.
wouldn't have maybe quite the same appeal. But look, that's a huge, huge program. I think you would do over 1 million viewers on Dynamite. You'd do easily the biggest pay per view number you'd ever did. Uh, like I just think that would be a huge feud. It would get everyone in wrestling talking. People who have been resistant to watching AEW would want to tune in. People who stopped watching wrestling would might tune in because he does have that allure still, especially because he hasn't been featured on in wrestling television in so long. But yeah, like I don't he's not gonna come in and be a mid Carter like Miro is. And look, I think
Yeah.
Miro's like
Exactly.
I don't really have a problem with Miro. I think people like overreact a little bit to the Miro booking. To me personally, like I just think that he wants to be this character. He's a heel.
Mhm.
I think people maybe expect him to be a babyface because he was kind of supposed to be a babyface. The babyface run in WWE is the run he never got. But if I think they're protecting Miro, and in maybe sometime this year they need Miro to main event a pay per view, and you can say like, well, he's been basically unbeaten for a year, and maybe he's not doing the most interesting thing, but you don't necessarily have to do the most interesting thing as soon as you debut. You can work your way up, especially if there's you have a lot of time and you got a multi-year contract and things like that. But yeah, like Punk's not gonna. Yeah, Punk comes back and his first feud is with like Sean Spears. or
Like,
like or just like something like
yeah.
that. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, look, I think he said that he's open to returning with WWE if the deal is right. I mean, I always thought that was weird because WWE like sued him. I know like the Dr. Aman technically sued him, but it was really WWE kind of backing that lawsuit. He
Hmm.
obviously is very unhappy with WWE. He, by all accounts, would be much more unhappier in the WWE environment of 2021 than he would be in 2011. It's as we
Yeah,
mentioned
you
earlier,
would think.
it's way more chaotic, and there's less like strong ideas coming out. But obviously, WWE could pay him a ridiculous amount of money. I mean, if WWE really felt like they wanted to turn pop a rating, if they really wanted to get people interested in WrestleMania this year because they don't have any big matches, they could call up and make a really big offer to CM Punk. They have almost limitless financial means to complete such a deal. They said, "Look, CM, Punk, we'll give you $30 million to come back and lose to Roman Reigns." He'd say yes, I think. Um, I mean, it's. I think if he's just maybe waiting for the right opportunity, and look, like you said, like the landscape when he left was different. There wasn't the right opportunity was not out there for him if he wanted to continue wrestling, and he, it seems like he's moved on, and like you said, he had the MMA thing, he's had he's worked in comic books, he's got all sorts of different things. He's a really busy guy, and uh, you know, I'm at the end of the day, I'm happy for him. In the original Colt Cabana podcast, he talked about how miserable he was wrestling, and as a fan, I kind of felt bad feeling like I wanted him to come back, and I always just thought that like I hope he finds happiness and he's not miserable doing what whatever he's doing, and if that involves not being a part of the wrestling industry, then so be it. As a fan, I'd like to see him come back, but like I said, I've moved on from expecting him to.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think just one silly idea for him to come back to would be like to be a manager for Serena Deeb. Like that would be a cool full circle kind of thing. Like to have Serena be his manager back in 10 years ago, and 10 years later he's like her manager, her mouthpiece. Like that would be definitely a big push for the women's division to have just get pop a number for those segments there. Obviously, that would probably be not suitable for a guy like CM Punk, but I just like just for a dumb silly thing that'd be a good full circle type thing for him
How
to be
about
Serena
he?
Deeb's manager.
How about he tag teams with Colt Cabana?
Oh God, he's
Well,
the new
that's
leader, Dark
yeah. Well, that's a
Order.
legit thing. Is that Colt Cabana and CM Punk were once extremely close friends, both coming
Hmm.
up from Chicago on the Indies, and then the podcast, and then the lawsuit, and they ended up becoming not good friends at all. In fact, sworn enemies. I think Cabana might have sued Punk over like
Over the
Punk's
legal fees. Yeah.
yeah, because Punk said like, "Oh, I'll pay all the legal fees," and then he didn't or whatever. So that actually could legitimately be a sticking point that Cabana works in AEW and is well liked in AEW by all accounts, and that might be a sticking point. That he doesn't want to work in a company that also has Colt Cabana. Of course, I also think he's really close friends with Gallows
Oh,
or
yeah. I think maybe.
Punk, Punk and
I don't
Gallows.
know if they
Like,
still are.
oh, I remember that. Yeah, you're right. And there's been a lot of reports that Punk like doesn't like talk to people in the wrestling industry anymore.
Hmm.
He's like really disconnected from it. So yeah, like I don't know, like if I were to dream book, I like the idea of him coming back and wrestling Kenny Omega. I think that would be a really interesting big feud to do. If he were to come back to WWE, I don't know if he came back to WWE, who'd you have him feud with?
I mean, on the main roster, I don't know. I guess that a matchup with Drew McIntyre would be interesting. Obviously, Roman Reigns, I guess, would be kind of interesting as well. But other than that, like, it's hard to come up with newer matchups for him because, like, I don't want to see him, if anything, with in Vince McMahon logic, he'd be feuding with Miz for whatever reason because of of their Twitter spats.
Yeah, like to me, it's like yeah, like even like a CM Punk Roman Reigns feud. Like, what does that look like? Like CM Punk calls out Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns beats the crap out of CM Punk. Like I don't know. It doesn't feel like I'm trying to think of someone like a CM Punk MJF feud. Um,
Oh yeah, for AEW, yeah, there's like infinite
yeah,
possibilities.
and then maybe that's just because maybe it's just a talking thing, right? Like CM Punk
Yeah, for
MJF
sure.
promo exchanges, yes. CM Punk Cody Rhodes, like those promos, that kind of exchange, good. CM Punk John Moxley. those promo exchanges, like that
Yeah.
gets, and that's just the fact that AEW is just a much better promo company than WWE. Like, do I really want to watch like CM Punk and Drew McIntyre like have a contract signing and that kind of stuff? I don't know. Do you got anything else you want to say on CM Punk?
Well, one other idea, one silly idea I thought of was what if New Japan and Bushiroad gets, they line up the brink trucks for CM Punk, and they make him the face of the U.S. expansion. Like, how big would that be? Like in this like imaginary one percent of a 1% thing that would never happen. But imagine Bushiroad and New Japan just did that. They brought the brink trucks for CM Punk just for him to be their face of the U.S. expansion.
Yeah, for me with Punk, like the appeal of Punk would almost be seeing him on weekly television because
Yeah,
you
for
get
sure.
those kind of promos and stuff like that. So New Japan to me would need like a more like traditional weekly television show, I think, to like best utilize them. I mean, they apparently
Mm.
have a TV deal coming to the US. We still haven't gotten quite an update on that. I know we talked about it on our last show. But to me, like yeah, I mean, he'd be good in New Japan, obviously. Look, I don't know how much he's got like left in the ring. He could be really rusty. He hasn't wrestled a
Yeah,
match in 10 years. He's probably like in his he's got to be in his early 40s now, right?
yeah, he's like 42 last time I
Yeah,
checked.
he's 42. So, I mean, and sure, that's not too old. And I'm sure, obviously he probably took, he took a literal beating in those UFC fights, but he, put his body at risk for UFC, but might be feeling better now. Look, I think he might be his future might be in commentary. He was great when he was doing commentary in WWE. He
For
could be
sure.
doing. I know he's done some commentary work uh, for like not. I don't think really UFC, but I think that's like Cage Fury fighting championships, like smaller stuff.
It's
And
it's basically their UFC's developmental because I know a lot of
right,
fighters from that from organization goes up to UFC sometimes.
yeah, and he'd be great on television. He's a really smart guy, very well spoken, has the right kind of wit to kind of react to stuff and come up with funny stuff to say. He was always good on when they used him on WWE television. Now I'm remembering his commentary run where he had like I forget, there was like a brawl at ringside and someone spilt his Pepsi and or was his Diet Coke or something, and he just got like really mad about it and like kept talking about it. It was just like the kind of sarcasm was so great. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely, despite the fact that he only wrestled for about 18 months. No, I'm sorry. He only wrestled for about half the decade. He retired in early 2014. He's probably easily one of the three or four most interesting people in wrestling personalities of the past 10 years in wrestling.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
Cena, Roman Reigns, for just how polarizing he's become, and probably Punk would, I see, be the most interesting people in wrestling over that time span. And the fact that he's been able to do that, he holds a very special place in the annals of wrestling history. And if he never comes back to wrestling, I will guarantee that in 2030 we will still be talking about like CM Punk one more match. Like how big would that be?
Yeah, the same thing we do with Stone Cold, right? I mean, that's just like you said before.
Yeah,
We just want to climb back all the time.
every year there's like one story where it's like Steve Austin on if he'd come back to wrestling, and Steve Austin says like, I don't know if I've officially retired. I don't think I'll ever do a match again, but I don't think I've ever officially retired. Something like that, and everyone will just be like, "Oh my god!" Like Stone Cold versus, like I don't know if we'll ever see The Rock again wrestle again. He never got that. He never really got the send off. I know people want to see him wrestle Roman Reigns, but that's a lot. I don't know if he's gonna be able to make that work. And that's seeing Rock, of course, is in a completely different situation where he's got a zillion other responsibilities that someone like um, Steve Austin or Punk, who are doing things. I'm not saying they're just sitting at home on their ass, but The Rock has like just like this celebrity status and projects that he's doing that doesn't really make him available to do something like wrestling again. But we'll see.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. I mean, that's why I brought up, the idea of Punk, being a manager for Serena Deep. I know it's a silly idea, but it's a cool full circle thing. And if you don't want to see him wrestling for, at least his initial run, he can warm himself up during that time, be a manager, perhaps.
yeah, you could do commentary, be a manager. Um, he's the new leader of Dark Order. That'd be something.
Oh,
We need a
yeah.
new exalted one, and it's CM Punk. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jason. As always, everyone else who's listening, who's commented on our videos and following us on Twitter and all of that stuff. Thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Uh, Tell us what you think about CM Punk. What you think, what you'd like to see happen to him in wrestling if he were to come back. If you want to see him in WWE, AEW, MLW, Impact, any wrestling promotion that he could presumably pop up in, let us know. And thanks a lot. And we'll see you next time.